TFA. Damn. Welcome back after I guess for us it's been like a 2 month hiatus. 2.5 months, something like that hiatus. So
It's
uh
been a minute.
yeah. So we're back. NFL
We're
free
back,
agency.
baby.
Full full swing. Full swing here. So I mean, let's be honest. This free agency period hasn't been as exciting as some of the other ones, but there has been some stuff, some more notable trades that have happened so far. But I figured time to start laying the groundwork for the upcoming season. So we figured we'd hop on here and do our annual free agency live stream. So yeah, Cody, how have you been?
Been good, man. Can't complain. We were talking a little bit before the show. The draft is coming up, so it's time to start digging into some rookie stuff. But for right now, have some craziness happening in the NFL as always. Never a dull moment in the league.
No, no, not at all. So I guess let's just get right into it. Really, I guess we can start with the quarterbacks. I think maybe more of a puzzling move was the Seattle trading Geno Smith to the Raiders, then turning around and then signing Sam Darnold to a
Yeah,
3-year, $100 million contract, $55 million total guarantee. I personally will tell you, I don't love the trade. I don't love it. I think they should have stuck with Geno. I think there's a lot of risk with Sam Darnold. Obviously, I know he's coming off a big year, but Kevin O'Connell has done a lot with worse quarterbacks, and I felt like it was a little bit of an overpay. I know he's younger than Geno Smith, but I also think Geno Smith at times gets hate that he really shouldn't at times. And I mean, he's been one of the more accurate quarterbacks over the past 3 or 4 years. And this move just kind of didn't make any sense to me from the Seattle side. And then obviously, in terms of trading, they also obviously traded DK Metcalf to your Pittsburgh Steelers. And then the Steelers turned around and signed him to a 5-year, $150 million extension. We'll talk about that in a second. So let's just first start with the Seattle situation here, and kind of what is your takeaways here for Sam Darnold?
I'm with you, man. I didn't really understand it either. I did see today they came out and said that the reason behind trading him was they seemed kind of far off on an extension, so they let him go. But I just don't understand what Seattle is doing. Like you mentioned, the DK trade, Lockett gone, traded Geno, but then they go and they pick up DeMarcus Lawrence. They re-signed Ernest Jones. Like it just seems like they're trying to do both things at once. They're trying to compete and rebuild, which I feel like just never ever works out the way it's supposed to. We'll have to see what happens. The Seattle offensive line is obviously an issue. That was something that was not that big of a deal with Minnesota. They obviously did a good job protecting him until those last couple weeks when he was just taking fucking 14 sacks per game. But yeah, I don't get it. I don't like the move, but I will say this seems like wheels all the way up for JSN. He is going to get as many targets as he can possibly handle. Obviously, they're going to have to go out and do something in the draft to add to that room. There's no way they can go into next season with the way that it looks right now. But regardless of what happens, it's still going to be a big time bump for JSN in that offense. That's my takeaway. JSN all
Like
the way
just
up.
roughly, where do you think you have him ranked?
He'll
I think
probably
he's
be, I don't know, like a high end two,
that's what I was
mid to
thinking. Like
high
probably
end two.
definitely top 15, maybe a little bit higher.
Yeah, I can see
You
that.
like the stuff with Clint Kubiak. They talked a lot about they really want to be a little bit more run first, stuff like that. So like I understand some of it, but like their offensive line is so bad. Like their offensive line has been terrible, and that really worries you with Sam Darnold. He's not good under pressure. So that is concerning. So I mean, we'll have to see what they do because they got some draft picks back from this. Now, as far as the Raiders side of it, I don't know what they're going to do here. I don't know if they are going to extend Geno Smith. Geno Smith is 35, I think, years old. I think it's still a possibility, at least right now, that maybe they look to the draft and still draft like a Shore Sanders, let him sit for a year while they have Geno Smith. I think that's still a possibility while they give him a 3rd round pick to do it. But I think Brock Bowers is still obviously in really good shape now. I think with Geno Smith, I think you feel better about someone like Jacoby Myers probably being like a top 36, like a wide receiver 3-ish type wide receiver with Geno Smith. We know that. So Chip Kelly is going to be the offensive coordinator now there in with the Raiders. So we have that. The other move that kind of I think people will want to talk about is probably the Justin Fields one, now going to the Jets, likely going to be their starting quarterback. I think this is a great move for him for fantasy purposes because I think that he could be like a top 15 quarterback this year because of his rushing upside. Hate it for everybody else. I don't love it for Garrett Wilson. I think Garrett Wilson remains. I know that even with Devontae Adams gone, he's kind of the only guy there. I don't love it. I just don't really love it. I don't think that we've really seen Garrett Wilson at least utilized as much as a downhill or downfield threat as much, and that's really where I think Justin Fields has been the best at. And then you have I don't really love it for Breece Hall either. I think some of it helps him in a way because we know how running quarterbacks help them, but it also hurts him because I don't think he's going to see nearly as much work in the passing game. And so,
No.
outside of that, I like it for Justin Fields. I think Justin Fields is going to be a viable option if you want to wait on quarterback, but I don't really love it for anybody else.
I'm with you on it. I think I never jumped on the Garrett Wilson train. I know that especially going into this season, he was, I think being drafted as a back end wide receiver 1. I know there were a lot of people that were really high on him. I never got that high on Garrett Wilson. I think we have seen, guys like DJ Moore be supported by Justin Fields. So I'm a little bit, I have a little bit more hope than it sounds like you do. I'm with you on Breece Hall. I just want to go back to the Raiders thing real quick. I'm really, really interested to see what they do in the draft. I know they're a team that's kind of been talked about being on the Ashton Genty train there with their first round pick. Could it be someone like Ted McMillan? Depending on what they do at wide receiver, you mentioned Jacoby Myers is like a top 36 kind of guy. I think he could be like a back end wide receiver too, as long as they don't go and spend a first or second round pick on a guy. I think they're going to add to that room for sure. But if he ends up coming out of, let's say, day 2 with no major addition, I think Jacoby Myers will end up being not necessarily a sleeper in the sense that I think he's going to blow up, but I think he's going to get overlooked. And I think in full PPR leagues, he could end up being a massive value because there's no way he's going to get steamed, or at least there shouldn't be a way that Jacoby Myers gets steamed. So that's a team that I'm really interested to see what ends up happening next month.
Yeah, I think that is definitely going to be a spot to watch. Last, I guess, of the last quarterbacks related that need to be mentioned here, just Daniel Jones, signing a $14 million contract. I don't think it's crazy to think that it's possible that he could take this job from Anthony Richardson. I think it's more likelier than not that at some point this year it could happen. I don't know if it'll happen right out the gate, but I think it's possible for something like this to happen. But because $14 million is a lot to pay a backup quarterback. Let me put it that way. All the other backup quarterbacks are getting somewhere in the $3 to $6 million range, depending on who they are. And so, we just saw today, Gardner Minshew signed with the Chiefs as a backup. None of these guys are getting that kind of money. So getting $14 million, obviously, it's not starter money, but that's definite. Hey, you definitely have a shot here of winning this job. So that's definitely going to be something to watch as we go on. It's here with comes to Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like the majority of what the issue is with Anthony Richardson is kind of just off the field, leadership type stuff where, he's not the first one in, last one out type shit. He's not doing the little things. It sounds like that's kind of started to change a little bit this offseason, but who knows how long that lasts. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we end up seeing something similar to what we saw last year where Anthony Richardson starts, then we get Danny Dimes thrown in there for a few games. He sucks. They go back to Richardson. I think it's just going to end up being an absolute mess unless Anthony Richardson really takes that step forward, which is still wild to think he has 30 starts in his entire career, less than 30 starts or something between the NFL and college. So you're still talking about someone who is super raw in terms of playing the actual quarterback position. So I think it's going to be a big thing to see what he can end up doing this offseason if he is going to be putting in that work to be the guy. Because Danny Dimes should not be a threat, but at this point he is.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think Danny Dimes is good, but we've never really seen Daniel Dimes and have like a functioning offensive line and stuff like that. And so we'll see. But it's definitely something to watch. But I think that's really it. Most of the quarterbacks I really need to hit on. Speaking of running backs, who takes Ginty? I think it starts with the Raiders. Like I think they're the team to watch. Like that could definitely take them there. I think the Cowboys are definitely in play as a team to watch there. That could take him.
But the Bears at 10.
The Bears for sure, yes. Especially with Ben Johnson being there, and them, the Jahmyr Gibbs, and then also David Montgomery. So it's not crazy to think, even though they just paid DeAndre Swift last season to do something like that. But like with this, the meat and potatoes of this draft is 100% the bread and butter is definitely the running backs. Like the running backs is the deepest position. I mean, there are likely 6-7 guys here that are going to be fantasy relevant within the next year, if not this as soon as this year. This is probably one of the best running back classes we've seen in a really long time, and I don't know if there's really a need to take somebody like that high. I'm never a fan of it. I think it's always bad process. We go back to the days of whenever the Cowboys took, last time they took a running back that high, they took Ezekiel Elliott. Whatever they could have taken Jalen Ramsey, and then the second round came back around and took Derrick Henry. But in the second round, but they didn't do that. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I do think he's probably not going to last past the top 15 picks because you also have Marion Hampton, who a lot of people, and it's kind of starting to be a little bit like last year with the Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors thing, where I guess there's some teams that actually have Hampton ahead of Ashton Ginty on their boards. So it's going to be kind of interesting there between those two. I think both of those guys definitely are first round picks for sure. But anyways, as far as the rookie running backs, as far as the free agent running backs, we haven't had a lot because I think a lot of teams, rightly and wrongly, are waiting for this draft class. And we're not seeing big contracts. Aaron Jones re-signed with the Vikings. But really the only movement, I think the only one that really stands out to me is Najee Harris, who went to the Chargers. They no longer have Gus Edwards. They no longer have J.K. Dobbins. So Najee Harris steps into a role that he's going to be the dude. And I'm not a big Najee Harris guy. I never have been. I don't think he's super explosive, though I will say. Surprisingly, when I looked, I didn't realize, but he was actually top 5 this year and carries of 20-plus yards, which is absolutely wild because he's never been that guy. But he has an opportunity here going to an offense that we know they really want to run the ball to absolutely be that dude. And so I think you at least have to look at Najee as probably a top 18 running back right now, with all things coming without before the draft, probably where he shakes out. It's a 1-year deal again for this with $5 million. So past that, we have Rico Dowdle getting a 1-year deal for $6 million, which is kind of surprising considering how well Chuba Hubbard played there. Samaje Perine went back to Cincinnati, which I think is actually good news, especially if they don't do anything else for Chase Brown. But Javonte Williams, speaking of the draft, once upon a time, a guy that I absolutely love that hasn't really been able to pan out. But Javonte Williams signs a 1-year, $3 million deal there. Surprisingly, they didn't bring back Rico Dowdle the way he played, but that's about it. I mean, Raheem Mostert signed with the Raiders, whatever. So is there anything that stands out to you, or what are your thoughts on the Najee Harris signing?
I think last year was the outlier year in terms of his explosiveness, like you were just saying. He had never done that before. It kind of seemed like once people started putting out the tweets about the lack of explosive runs that he's had is when it really started to take off for him, just one of those coincidental type of things last year. But if they don't do really anything else noteworthy in that backfield, it's gonna be similar to what it's been in Pittsburgh, right? 270 something carries. he's going to end up getting 1,000 yards just based off of volume. We know that he's an above average pass catcher. I wouldn't say he's anything special, but he can function there fine. Like you said, outside of that, man, it's not been pretty, especially going from what we had last year with all the big names being moved. Obviously, Barkley leading the way there. Mixon really had a hot start to the season. It has not been that way this year.
No, I mean, Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry.
Yeah. Do you think Alexander Mattison has any impact on Jalen Wright?
I wouldn't think so. But like he shouldn't, in my mind. Alexander Madison's not good. We know this. But you never know. Like he could play some sort of Raheem Mostert light type role that he played. But I mean, Alexander Mattison, I think we know who he is. It feels like a lot like when the Chiefs signed Elijah Mitchell. I was like, why? Like, what are we doing? Like, why are we signing Elijah Mitchell? Like, at least with when it comes to Alexander Mattison, like he's relatively stayed healthy throughout his career compared to Elijah Mitchell, who is always hurt. Like, I think you have to go back to his rookie year. Whenever you can talk about him like being healthy and like producing anything. So, but yeah, I mean, so far, really the running back position has been pretty dead. I think outside of the Najee Harris signing, that's been really the only one that I think that like really moves the needle for me. So I think we could probably move over to wide receiver. But like I said, I think most teams are rightly waiting for the draft. And I definitely think like a team like the Chiefs are definitely still in play to draft a running back inside the top 4 rounds because they definitely need a running back. I know Isaiah Pacheco will be back there, but Elijah Mitchell's certainly not that guy.
Real quick, if the Steelers don't add someone, let's say, obviously they don't have their second, let's say they don't add a running back until like round 5 or 6, where do you think you'll have Jaylen Warren?
And I think he has to be a top 24 running back at that point. I mean, we know Jaylen Warren has the he has the upside. Like, and we've seen it before. Like, there were a lot of times last year that he definitely looked like, once again, better than Najee Harris. And they put a second round tender on him, which they have to. But it just you never know. You never know with Arthur Smith at this point. And I mean, I think. But though I would view him, I think you'd have to view him as a top 24 running back because there's nobody that like, truly stands in his way at that point. Probably even a top 20 running back because this is a team that's definitely going to want to run the ball. Now, obviously, we don't know yet what they're going to do. The Steelers at quarterback, unless it's going to be Mason Rudolph, I guess, who they brought back. But it sounds more and more likely that it's going to be either Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson at this point. So, speaking of that, let's move over to wide receivers because we can move into the DK Metcalf part. And like, I guess from like a schematic standpoint, I get it because you have 2 wide receivers you can send deep, which opens things up for the run game and some of those things. But like, it sucks for like a fantasy purpose because like I have no interest in wanting to draft a DK Metcalf with George Pickens there. I don't think there's enough volume going around. We've seen before Arthur Smith running offenses that really struggled. I mean, if you remember back when he was with the Falcons, right? And he had Drake London and Kyle Pitts, which, whatever you want to think about Kyle Pitts, but Bijan Robinson, like all these weapons, and they never really got utilized correctly. And I have no faith that Arthur Smith is going to be able to do anything with this. So, like, I don't love it. Whether it's Aaron Rodgers, whether it's Russell Wilson, I don't really love any of them. They would have somebody that, like, fell to me, like, where I would feel like it's some sort of a value. Like DK Metcalf would have to be like a 6th or 7th round pick before I even really got excited about it. I think George Pickens falls further than that, especially with how much money they just paid DK Metcalf. But I didn't really understand the vision behind it whenever you still have Arthur Smith as your offensive coordinator. Like, it feels a lot like for the most part, that the Steelers need to, what we've talked about, is blow this thing up, start over, acquire some early draft capital, and actually get you a franchise quarterback because they're going down the path of like, me as a Chiefs fan, I remember these things because before Patrick Mahomes, this is what the Chiefs would do. Always bring in retread quarterbacks, whether it was Alex Smith or Matt Castle or quarterback David Heward, just quarterback, and it would never just go after and get a top 10 quarterback. And they finally did it with Patrick Mahomes, but that's the cycle that feels like the Steelers are in. They're just continually putting in all these other quarterbacks since Big Ben's been gone, and they're Mike Tomlin's too good of a coach to allow this team to be a really bad team. They somehow find their way to get to 500 every year, barely sneak into the playoffs, get kicked out in the first round of the playoffs every single year, and it's super frustrating because they're never going to be able to get that guy.
We do not have enough time for me to go on my Steelers diatribe, but I echo everything you just said. Obviously, it not only is I'm gonna end up doing it anyway. Not only is Arthur Smith still the OC, we don't have a fucking quarterback. And I feel like with making the move for DK, you have now pigeonholed yourself into having it be Aaron Rodgers or bust. Because there's no one else. If there was a different OC, you could at least make the case that Jameis Winston would be like fun. He would at least make like the Steelers an interesting watch, but not with Arthur Smith at OC. So I don't, dude. It just does not make sense to me whatsoever. They've now completely wasted Cam Hayward, TJ Watt to an extent. They've completely wasted their time and how good that defense was for a little bit there. But anyway, unless it's Aaron Rodgers, like even with Aaron Rodgers, I think the best you're hoping for is probably like 7 targets each per game for DK and Pickens, right? Like that's like probably like what you would make you feel good if that's what they got. Because I do think with Aaron Rodgers that the plus to that would be he would be the one to just like audible and call his own plays if Arthur Smith is trying to call his stupid bullshit with Connor Hayward in the flat or Darnell Washington or all this other stupid shit that Arthur Smith loves to do. At least with Aaron Rodgers, there's like that glimmer of hope where he gets the call and just says like, "Fuck you, we're not running fullback dive on 3rd and 7." Arthur Smith, but yeah, that's not a great one. I do think one that is actually fun, and it's an obvious one, but Davante Adams to the Rams is pants off type of fun. It does make you question with Cooper Kupp, like, have they just seen it up close long enough that they just think he's cooked? You know what I mean? Like that's because there was I forget which podcast Sean McVay was on, but like normally whenever you have those kind of questions where it's like, hey, like could he come back? There's a lot of that coach speak where it's like, yeah, if it ends up working out, blah blah blah. He shut that shit down immediately. I maybe it was like one of the Barstool podcasts he was on, but immediately he was just like, no, I don't think so. Like I don't see it happening. So it's really weird the way things ended there for Cooper Kupp, but for Davante Adams and Puka Nacua on that team, that is going to be a ton of fun. I haven't really thought about where I would have them in rankings. I don't know if you've put any thought into that. Are they both wide receiver ones for you? Are they on the wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 fringe? Where do you think you're going to have them?
Yeah, I was actually playing around with that today a little bit, trying to, we still have a long ways to go and with rookies and everything else, but I was kind of playing around with it. And I had Puka Nacua before that as a wide receiver 4, but I was like, with Davante, I moved him down a little bit to wide receiver 6, but then I had Davante Adams at wide receiver 15, which I feel pretty good about. Davante Adams obviously is getting older; he's 32, but he still proved last year that he still has something left in the tank. Matthew Stafford is the absolute wide receiver kingmaker. He does it every single year. That was really the big concern was, before, a couple, month and a half ago was that Stafford was going to get traded and all that stuff that went around, and they decided to keep, which was definitely the right move, I think, on their part. I mean, they were really another, drive away from, or almost, beating the Eagles in the playoffs to where they would have went to the Super Bowl. So I think that was a smart move for them. But Davante Adams now with Puka Nacua and Matthew Stafford is phenomenal. That was definitely, I think, the best move we got in free agency that really stood out. I think another one that really stood out to me that just doesn't seem to get a lot of talk. I love the Christian Kirk trade to the Houston Texans. I think, for a team that's definitely needing wide receiver, Tank Dell, I would be shocked if he played in
Yeah.
2025. And then obviously Stephon Diggs is a free agent still. And so, like, there's a big need there at wide receiver. I think you put him right there into the slot, which is where he really thrives there. And I just really like this move for them. I think, but the other moves that don't make any sense has been, but I guess there's started to be some stuff coming out about their offensive line, them trading Laramie Tunsil. They traded Kenyon Green, which the Kenyon Green one wasn't as crazy because he really hasn't lived up to the hype. But the Laramie Tunsil one was surprising considering how bad their offensive line was. But there started to been some like stuff come out there that I guess that he's really been really toxic for that locker room. They really haven't got along with the coaching staff, and so like this felt like a move like that was inevitable. That was definitely they were just going to get rid of him no matter what because of this. So it does seem surprising, but they did add some draft capital here. But overall, I still really like that move, Christian Kirk here. Hopefully, CJ Stroud can kind of bounce back from that season he had last year because it was pretty brutal for most part last year for CJ Stroud on offense. Still love Nico Collins. Nico Collins is a locked in top 5 wide receiver. But I think Christian Kirk now, if this offense can get back on track, definitely now, I think offensive line, especially tackle, is going to be huge for them coming up, into the draft.
Yeah, that was certainly surprising. I'm with you on the Christian Kirk. He's been one of my favorite players for the past couple seasons. So I think that's a really good fit. Filled a need. Tank Dell, I can't see it. Like maybe if they make like a deep playoff run type of thing, but I don't think we see him fantasy relevant this year whatsoever. And I think that one has kind of like slid under the radar and no one's really talked about it just because it felt like it happened so early on that it's kind of gotten buried. But I'm with you there. Christian Kirk is going to be someone who ends up going in the double-digit rounds again, or at least like maybe round 9, round 8 at the earliest. But he's someone who's going to slide under the radar no matter what. Really like him. The Debo trade or the Debo move to Washington is really interesting. I think that it's going to end up being, assuming that Debo stays healthy, I think this is going to be a negative for Terry McLaurin because they had no reliable wide receiver 2 last year. I mean, Zach Ertz was kind of like the de facto wide receiver 2. You had like the random pop-off weeks with Noah Brown, the random pop-off weeks with De'Ami Brown. And I think it's going to end up being a detriment to Terry McLaurin. And then on the other side of that is if Brandon Ayuk does end up getting moved, Jawan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall are going to be 2 of my favorite draft picks next season.
Or this season. The whole thing seems so weird. I mean, the 49ers is absolutely blowing it up right now, which, I mean, to some degree, I guess it makes sense. But like the Brandon Ayuk one would be really wild to me. I mean, they just signed him to a new deal last year. But yeah, I mean, coming off an ACL, depending on where he gets moved to, yeah, I mean, you'd have to love Ricky Pearsall. I really like Ricky Pearsall, anyways. Like whatever happens with Brandon Ayuk, it doesn't really matter to me. But if that were to happen, yes, I think both those guys come flying up the board, as along with George Kittle as well. So, but the Debo thing to me, I think it's really going to be if he can stay healthy and if he can. Sounds like he was pretty overweight, so I think they were saying he was like 10 to 15 pounds overweight for most of last year, which made sense because he looked like it. Like watching him, I was like, dude, this dude does not look like it felt like receiver running around out there. He did not look as explosive as he used to. So, I mean, he did have the pneumonia, midway through the year and all that stuff. That probably didn't help. But we'll see when it comes to him. But Jayden Daniels obviously is in a great spot, but I do think it does hurt Terry McLaurin a little bit. I'm not as excited. I know I think some people, talk about him as being like a 3rd or 4th round pick. I wouldn't want to draft him there. I would, he would have to be like probably a late 4th, early 5th wide receiver for me to want to take there. A lot of the production last year stemmed from 13 touchdowns that he had last year. Now, the funny part was, he was a guy that I really liked last year because of Jayden Daniels, but now I think he's probably going to get overdrafted a little bit. I do think Deebo Samuel is going to play a part there on that one. Past those ones, are there any other ones that really stood out to you at the wide receiver position?
Not necessarily like stood out. I do think Josh Palmer going to the Bills is semi interesting. Like it still feels like they're missing like a true alpha, like the Stephon Diggs. I do really like Khalil Shakir. Happy to see that, he got his payday. But like that's not someone that you funnel your pass offense through. You know what I mean? So it still seems like they're searching for like that true wide receiver one. That's another team I'm interested to see if they add someone else. Obviously, they brought Keon Coleman in last year, but he's what his issues in Florida State were the same things we saw in the NFL with his inability to separate. Josh Allen is obviously a little bit of a DGAF quarterback, so it's not that big of a deal. But you still want somebody like a Stephon Diggs in that offense to really unlock that passing offense. So I think Josh Palmer could potentially be interesting. DK Metcalf, I think, is going to be like a boom bust kind of wide receiver. Not super high on it for fantasy purposes. I could see like the broken play Lamar type, where he's scrambling side to side, the kind of the shit we saw him do in the Bengals game. I think that is going to end up being make for a fun highlight here and there. But I don't think it's going to be anything dependable. But I do think that was a good signing, just a good football signing for the Ravens in general. Outside of that, there wasn't really anything else that stood out from a wide receiver perspective. We already hit on JSN and his unlimited targets that he is likely looking at, and then depending on what happens with Ayuk, we already touched on Jennings and Ricky P. Was there anything else that stood out to you?
Well, I mean, we still have a ton of veteran aging wide receivers that haven't signed yet. Cooper Kupp, obviously, Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, Brandon Cooks, Deontay Johnson, Tyler Lockett. It's the land of misfit toys of wide receivers that are over 30 years old. Still left to see I don't know what's going to happen with Deontay Johnson. That dude signed with 47 teams last year, and none of them worked out. So I don't know. And he's only 28 years old, but he may not get another shot. And if he does, it might just be like an invite to camp or something like that. I don't know if any team's going to really invest any real money into him. But Stephon Diggs coming off the ACL, coming off the injury, obviously some team's going to give him a shot, but it may not be until after the draft. Keenan Allen, I think he still has a little bit left in the tank. I don't know if, there's been talk about – I can tell you the place I don't want him to go to, and that is back to Chicago. I really think that Rome Odunze can, take a big step forward. I love what the Bears have done with their offensive line. I know that's not something we really talked about, but I think it definitely is going to play a role in fantasy impact this year. They have they're not fucking around with their offensive line this year. They have went out, they traded for Joe Thuney. They have just added piece after piece. Drew Dalman from the Falcons, which is one of the best centers in the league. This offensive line should be really, really good this year. Jonah Jackson. And I wouldn't be surprised if they add more through the draft here. But, that's what we want to see for Caleb Williams. But I think this could be a big boost if Keenan Allen leaves, especially with Ben Johnson now there for Rome Odunze. And so I think this could be a really big bounce back year for Rome Odunze, who was fine last year. He wasn't a big fantasy impact guy. Had a couple games, but other than that, but obviously that offense was just dreadful last year. They cleaned house. They did all the right things. And I think investing in the Bears offense this year, I think is going to be something that I'm going to want to do. And as long as it doesn't get steamed up, I think it could be one of the better, places to invest this year in that offense.
Yeah, absolutely. We kind of touched on it with them being in the Ashton Jeanty sweepstakes. So that's a team I'm really curious what they do round one. And then the only other thing I'll throw in there with the wide receivers that kind of slipped my mind is a quiet winner that I'm also curious to see where he ends up going in drafts is Ladd McConkey. Because obviously with, they didn't get the tight end. They were rumored to be kind of in the Evan Ingram sweepstakes, but Ingram went to Denver and that was the end of that. Bringing Mike Williams back, Quentin Johnson was, he had his splashes, but he kind of is what he is at this point. So I think Ladd McConkey is a quiet winner coming out of this, but I'm curious to see where he ends up going in drafts come August.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ladd McConkey's the top. I mean, he's another like borderline top 15 wide receiver this year. He was really good last year, but
yeah,
I mean, other than that, I don't think there's a lot to talk about. Like, Jacksonville situation, they brought in De'Ami Brown, but I don't know. Like, he did flash at the end of last year, but I feel like with where the Commanders are with the wide receivers, that they would have brought him back. They really felt the need for it. But there with Christian Kirk gone, it does open up the slot. Obviously, Brian Thomas is still like the alpha there. Should be a borderline first round pick this year for people. Like he was phenomenal down the stretch last year. He carried people to fantasy championships if you had him. I mean, scoring 25 plus fantasy points almost every single week. But right now, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what Liam Cohen can do with that offense. Kind of get it to around new direction with Doug Peterson gone, Pep Hamilton's gone. So, maybe De'Ami Brown is like a best ball late round dart throw. I think you could take a shot on because he did flash a little bit there. But other than that, like there really hasn't been a whole lot else to really talk about in terms of the wide receiver positions. Like I said, a lot of these veterans, you just gotta hope they don't go to anywhere that's going to block a situation or muddy up a situation. That's all I hope when it comes to these dudes. Because I mean, all of these guys, whether it's Amari Cooper, Keenan Allen, Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, they're all going to get signed. It's just going to depend on where and the situation they end up in. But I will say too that this wide receiver class, at least right now, is certainly not getting the buzz as we've seen the last couple of years. It feels like a lot of people are more down on this wide receiver class than we've seen in the last couple of years. So I mean, I think that doesn't really help things either.
Yeah, I think part of that is just because of how well, like everyone's talking about the running backs going into the combine. A bunch of them did really well at the combine as well. So that kind of like blew their stock up. But I do think, I'm not sure how many like alphas we have in this draft class, but I do think there are going to be a lot of like really good, like let's say like wide receiver, like threes for fantasy purposes, right? Going to be wide receiver twos on a team, but like wide receiver threes for fantasy purposes that could end up growing into bigger roles. There's also just not like a ton of spots where you're looking at where it's just like, oh yeah, just plug this guy in that offense. And he, like we had last year where you're talking about with the Marvin Harrison, the neighbors, and even Brian Thomas to an extent. We don't have a ton of those types of situations. I mean, the Patriots, obviously they have a need for wide receiver 1, 2, and 3. That did not work out for them. As much as I love Jalen Polk, hopefully he can do something this year. Be like, I guess Carolina, New England, like those are the ones you're looking at where you could have one of these rookies like step in and like really jump into a high quality type of target share. So I think that has something to do with it as well. But there's still a ton of guys that we'll certainly be talking about next month that we can be excited about.
I think this draft class feels more like the Drake London, Garrett Wilson draft class to me. I think is what this kind of feels like.
It's fair.
All right, let's move over to tight ends. And so we first had Juwan Johnson going back to the Saints. We had
Penn State, great.
Yeah. Mike Gesicki going back to the Bengals.
Penn State, great.
Do you want to talk about Britton Strange?
He is a quiet winner. As long as they don't go out and do anything crazy like take, Tyler Warren, Penn State, great. As long as they don't go out and do anything crazy like that, I do think that he is a quiet winner. Parker Washington as well, Penn State, great.
Yeah. So we had Evan Ingram go get released and then sign with the Broncos there. So Bo Nix gets another weapon, which they desperately need because it's Courtland Sutton and just a lot of dudes. Marvin Mims kind of flashed a little bit, so especially there at the end, started to come on a little bit. But I think those are the big. I think Gesicki one could be end up being big, like one that like if you're wanting to wait on tight end, like I haven't really dove head first into obviously like redraft stuff and everything yet on all that. I will do that after the draft and everything. But like I feel like he's could be a guy that's like a borderline top 12 tight end. Don't love it as much that T Higgins is coming back to Cincinnati, but anybody tethered to Joe Burrow, and it really felt like that they really kind of figured out how to utilize him the correct way, and really was kind of a big piece for them. And as much as this, as bad as that offense is going to, or excuse me, that defense is going to be, like their defense was bad last year. I think it's going to be even worse this year. And this could be a team that has to put up 40 points a game. And so I think there's going to be definitely enough to go around. They don't really have that number three. We thought maybe Ishavas was going to be that guy. Did really kind of had some flashy moments, but didn't really come from there. So I think it's definitely in the range of possibility that someone like Mike Gesicki could end up being like a really solid tight end too. And he's going to have some tight end 1 weeks for sure.
Yeah, obviously little joke there with guys like Brenton Strange, but I think he could be, a fine late round tight end that you're looking at. Like Gabe Davis is a turd. They're going to have to, again, depending on what they end up doing. We've seen Brenton Strange really put up big Evan Ingram type numbers in stretches. He did fall off a little bit there toward the end of the year, but he stepped into that role very well. With the money that they just gave Juwan Johnson, I'm curious to see how that shakes out in New Orleans. Obviously, with having Kellen Moore come in, hopefully that can be a boon to that offense. Taysom Hill had that really late ACL injury in December, I think. So not really sure what his timetable is for returning. Foster Moreau's still there, but I think the contract that they gave Juwan Johnson, again, not someone you're going to be looking at in the top 12 or anything like that. But, if you end up waiting on tight end, you kick the can down the road. Maybe if you're in a 2 tight end league, those are out there. They do exist. These are some of the guys you're going to look at, but there's no one from a free agency standpoint that, I think move themselves up into the tight end 1 discussion for fantasy purposes.
What are your thoughts on Evan Ingram going to Denver?
I think it's a really good fit. Like you said, they had to add another weapon, and they were, kind of tied to some of the Tyler Warren discussions I saw early on. So that was obviously an area that Sean Payton wanted to address. We know that he has success in the past with tight ends. So I think that is a really good landing spot for him. But he was in a healthy tight end. Healthy tight end. A healthy Evan Ingram was in that tight end 1 discussion regardless. He's just now moving to a different color jersey.
Yeah, I think this tight end class that's coming in, there's definitely some intriguing options outside of Tyler Warren, excuse me. I know Harold Fannin was a guy that was getting some buzz, but then didn't really test as well at the combine. But either way, like I think that there's definitely some so there's gonna be a couple tight ends that come from here that we'll
Colson Loveland.
Yeah, is another one. Overall though, like I've said, like this free agency class this year just really wasn't that strong. But like there was a lot more options, at least on the defensive side of the ball. This year where teams really went out, like the Vikings, man. I'll tell you what, like I know the AFC West like feels like it's getting better and better, but the NFC North is going to be a fucking gauntlet. Like with how good the Bears have gotten better, the Lions are still really good, the Packers are still going to be there, and then the Vikings have just went out and loaded up this year too with adding a bunch of new players, improve their defense. So like that defense is going to, or that division is, I think, the hardest in football right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they went out and that's the advantage you get with having the rookie contract, right? Like that is the NFL cheat code, but they went out and just dropped bags across the board. Like we knew last year, like what their calling card was on defense, they were going to end up, if you pick the right week for them, you could string them defensively because they were just going to blitz the absolute hell out of you. But they weren't a good defense, quote unquote. But now going out with, the names they added with Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave, locked up Byron Murphy long term, Isaiah Rogers a corner, went out, got Penn State great, Will Fries on the offensive line. So they are making moves, and that is not a division that I would want to be in. The only other thing that I'll throw out, since we're kind of getting toward the tail end here, is with some of the moves that the Cardinals have made. I think they could potentially be like a sneaky, your round 17 defense that you take once, other people in your league have taken 2 at this point. I think with some of the moves that they have made, they could be in that discussion for you to have your. Obviously, we'll have to wait and see like what their first couple weeks are in terms of schedule once that gets released in May, I believe. Both going out, getting Dalvin Tomlinson, Josh Sweat, Akeem Davis-Gaither at linebacker, always still having Budda Baker there. Max Melton, their rookie corner who played pretty well last year. I think, and talk about a division that's gotten weaker. We're already talking about the Seahawks, the 49ers kind of being up in the air right now. I think that could be a sneaky last round defense for us to be looking at.
Yeah, I mean, and they were actually a pretty sneaky defense last year. Like, I can't remember how many times I talked about them as a streaming option. So, yeah, I don't hate that. I mean, the Patriots out here just unloading the bank because they once again have $100 million to spend this offseason and signing Milton Williams and Harold Landry, Carlton Davis. I mean, obviously, with Mike Vrabel taking over, we knew that they were going to focus on the defensive side of the ball, and that is definitely what they've done because they have backed up a Brinks truck to some of these dudes out here getting money, but they still have no wide receivers. So sad because I actually like Drake May. I think Drake May showed pretty well last year for the most part, but they really need to get that man some weapons. But there really hasn't been anything to really speak of for the most part in terms of this year's off, because they weren't going to be a team that's going to go bring in Devontae Adams at 32 years old. Like, that's not going to happen. So this just wasn't a great, but I am interested to see what they do in free agency because they definitely should be in the draft because that should be definitely a team that's looking for wide receiver help.
Yeah, I thought they were going to be in the in the T Higgins discussion. I guess like technically they still could be. That's another team. Hendrickson on looks like he's on the way out. The other edge, Ohio State kid. I can't think of his name right now. Retired. Like that was a defense.
Sam Hubbard.
Yeah. Hubbard. That was a defense that was awful. If you're talking about them without Hubbard and Hendrickson, my goodness gracious. Like that is, Joe Burrow throwing for 5,000 yards potentially because they're just going to have no choice. And that's going to be a fun watch for fantasy purposes. But, if there's any teeth to the Ayuk stuff, like maybe he ends up landing there, but like they need Ayuk plus. Like that is a team that is devoid of weapons. I think probably at 4, you're looking at them going offensive lineman, talking with Josh in the chat, Campbell, Membu, someone like that at 4. I think they should probably trade down, just get more capital because they can still end up with a decent offensive lineman if they trade, to the teens or so. But discussion for another day.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely need to be diving more into rookie talk and probably do some mock drafts, stuff like that, some rookie mocks and all that kind of stuff for dynasty purposes because that's always fun to do. Really start digging more into some of these rookies and everything else. But yeah, I mean, I think overall, like I said, is a strong free agency class. There really wasn't a whole lot of like blow your socks off, really excited moves that have happened so far. So hopefully the draft does more for that. Good. Right now, there's really not a whole lot else out there. But is there anything else you want to talk about?
No, man. We're back.
Yeah, we're back. I'll have some more stuff. I took a little break, but time to get back at it. NFL. I mean, the draft is about a month and a half away at this point. To the end of
Yeah.
April, so yeah. And then shortly after that, it all fires back up again and redraft back, and we're doing all that and drafting in August. So it happens fast around here. So, anyways, appreciate everybody rocking with us. Appreciate everybody in the comments. Hope everybody is enjoying themselves. March Madness is about to start, one of the greatest times of the year. MLB is about to start, so NFL draft's right around the corner. So things are starting to heat back up again. So appreciate everybody. And if you haven't already, hit that like and subscribe button. And we will see you on the next one. Bye.